this program has been accredited through STAT Educational Services for 1 contact hour of continuing education for healthcare risk managers, nurses, pharmacists, and pharmacy technicians. To obtain CE credit for this program, participants must watch this DVD program in its entirety and then go online to facile.statce.com to complete the program's post-test and evaluation. A passing score of 70% or higher on the post-test is required to receive CE credit. Upon passing the test, participants will be able to immediately print out their Statement of Credit or Certificate of Successful Completion. To ensure this program is non-biased and free from any form of commercialization, the presenter, James A. Jorgensen, has disclosed being a paid consultant or member of an advisory board for Amgen, Carmel Pharma, and Genentech. This program has been supported by an unrestricted educational grant provided by Carmel Pharma Inc., makers of Facile. This program was developed for educational purposes only. It does not serve as an endorsement of any product related to the program mentioned or otherwise. This program is not intended to discuss any off-label usage of the products or devices mentioned.
What I'd like to do this morning, obviously you could talk on this particular topic for probably a week. I'd like to try and focus it to oncology-specific elements and really take a look at USP Chapter 797 for compounding sterile products and the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health's high-risk drug alert. Talk about the current iteration of those 2 documents, but then also talk about the revisions that were just published last month, which would have a really significant impact on all of our practices if those are actually adopted. And then I actually had an opportunity to represent the Hematology Oncology Pharmacists Association in Hamburg, Germany in January at the NZW meeting, which is kind of the premier meeting for oncology practitioners in Europe. So I had a chance to really interact with our colleagues from about 8 or 9 different European countries and see what they're doing in Europe. So I'll try and weave in some of the current European standards for oncology and biohazardous drugs and use those as an additional point of reference. This is my practice site at the University of Utah, and we have actually 6 hospitals, 4 of which are on the Health Science Center campus here, and 2 which are in the southern part of the state. And then we have I think we're up to 12 clinic pharmacies, and we fill about 2.2 million scripts a year. So we're kind of spread out, but at the main Health Science Center campus here, we've got the main hospital. And originally, I got interested in the topic of safe handling probably about 6 years ago. We had our oncology floor, which was the 5th floor. It housed the oncology unit and our bone marrow transplant unit. So it was an important part of what we do. But about 6 years ago, the focus really got raised when John Huntsman, he's a local billionaire and on the 30 richest men in the world list, he decided to take an active interest in cancer research and treatment. So he gave the university 2 gifts. The first was $151 million to build the Huntsman Cancer Research Institute, which is actually focused primarily on cutting-edge cancer research, but it also houses our ambulatory infusion clinic. And then he gave us a second gift to build the Huntsman Cancer Specialty Hospital, and that's what this is, and that was $125 million. So you can imagine with $275 million available to us, our interest in oncology suddenly went up a bit. And it was also really interesting for us in the pharmacy because it afforded us the chance to actually build 2 new pharmacies from the ground up. And it's amazing what you can build with somebody else's $275 million. So when we went into this project, we really wanted to try and make the pharmacies as safe as we possibly could make them, both from a patient perspective, but also from a healthcare worker's perspective. So that's when I really started to get a lot more active in safe handling, and I've just kind of continued with it ever since. Just for some brief background, USP 797, you're probably all familiar with it ad nauseum, but it was actually issued in January of 2004. And with the United States Pharmacopoeia, any of the chapters that fall below 1,000 can actually be surveyed against by the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations, can be enforced by the Food and Drug Administration, and they can actually be adopted as state regulations, and that generally happens through the state boards of pharmacy. So it actually, in many instances, carries force of law. The interesting thing about USP 797 is when it first came out, there was a lot of consternation and people were trying to figure out what to do with it. There we go. Get a little better projection with this. People were trying to figure out what to do with it, and the interesting thing is that over the 2.5 years that it's been out, people are still trying to figure out what to do with it because it's not a static document. Since its issuance in 2004, there's actually been 2 published revisions already to 797, and they actually have a working group that's dedicated just to looking at this and updating it. So the most recent set of revisions that was published actually just came out last month. The interesting thing about this, one of the big changes happened in April. And when 797 first came out, there was actually a group that was constituted, and I had the opportunity to represent ASHP on the group with the Joint Commission and with USP to determine how the Joint Commission was going to survey against USP 797. So we actually put together a schedule when we had to be in compliance with all of the different elements of USP 797, and we were all working off of that under the assumption that the Joint Commission, when they came to our facilities, would be specifically looking at our compliance with the standards in USP 797. But in April, the Joint Commission actually did an about-face on that position. And what they said was that they are not going to survey against the specific elements of USP 797. Compliance is going to be up to each individual organization. They're just going to come in, they're going to look at the standards, the medication management standards that they've always had, and that they publish, some of which incorporate elements of USP 797, but they're not going to go outside those standards to specifically look at USP 797. So that was kind of a big 180 from where they originally started. The interesting thing, though, is right now there's 16 states, and Utah is one of them, that have actually adopted USP 797 and incorporated it into their pharmacy practice acts. So for us in Utah, we have to comply with all of the elements of USP 797 since it actually carries force of law as part of the Practice Act. Now there are a number of other states that are also considering that, and I'm actually not sure where Michigan is on that. Do you know? Okay. But that's definitely something worth keeping an eye on, because really the state board is probably the driving incentive for us to want to comply. You see Joint Commission hopefully once every 3 years. You rarely see an FDA inspector, but you see the state board every year. Clearly, when you look at Chapter 797, the intent is on improving patient safety. They're looking at reducing harm to the patient from microbial contamination. They're also looking at reducing harm to the patient through large content errors in compounding. In the first iteration, oncology medications were not specifically mentioned in USP 797, but in the revisions that were published last month, there's actually a specific section on hazardous drugs as compounded sterile products. And one of the things that USP did, I think they got a lot of feedback from technicians and pharmacists about the first iteration and the second revisions as well. So they actually incorporated one of our colleagues from Texas, Larry Griffin, into the USP working group. And Larry was one of the